Kia ora, good afternoon. Welcome to Connecting the Dots podcast. This afternoon, I would like to bring to you a case that my father and I worked on for most of my life. It is probably the most famous unsolved mystery next to the Jack the Ripper murders, like in the history of man. I have spent many years looking at this case and studying different people's presentations of it in order to find things that stood out to me. However, I was not going to present my findings until I was 100% sure that I was on the right track with what I was thinking. And I kind of was on the right track, but I kind of wasn't as well. And because, as you know, I'm an intuitive podcaster, and like with the Brandon Swanson case, when I have been going through a plethora of different unsolved murders and missing people cases and all of that on YouTube, I then one just hits the right way, and I know that I'm being told this is the one you need to work on next. And like with Brandon, this one kept coming up, but I was too scared to look into it. I kept putting it off because this one's hard. This one's hard. This one's really hard. However, as an occult scientist, as a Scorpio, it's my job to raise the dead, to give them a voice, to bring it all to the light. It's my brain skims the surface to see what is hidden in the underbelly. I bring that which is buried beneath the surface and I raise it, I bring it up, I raise the dead, I bring it to life. I bring the underworld to life, I bring death to life. Because I'm a Scorpio and that's everything I rule. That and, sex and regeneration and other people's money and, all the wonderful things. I just think Scorpio rule the best stuff, the most interesting stuff. But I would say that because I'm a Scorpio who's an evolutionary theorist and an occult scientist, so I get to do all the best stuff as far as I'm concerned when it comes to babies and, all just, I love it. Regeneration, rebirth, evolution, sex, all of it. I just love it. I have the best job. I love everything about what I do because I see that which is hidden and bring it to life, which is the mere definition of the occult, is, knowledge of the hidden. And I thought I understood this case. I thought I knew where I was going, and like I said, I was partly right. But today, because it kept popping up and popping up and popping up, I knew that I was being told now is the time, Debbie Lee, to work on this case. You need to give these people their voice. It is time they are heard and that this case is solved so that people can stop assuming that it was demons, aliens, murder, insanity, all the stuff in between when people can't figure stuff out or don't do proper research. It's made me a little bit mad. I'll be perfectly honest with you. I've become a little bit protective of these men, and I'm here to defend them and give them some honour in their name because of some of the accusations that have been made about these poor men. That when I think you look at what I'm trying to tell you when I, present my findings to you, I think that they have been treated unfairly, that they have had things placed upon their name and their family that survived and will still be living today, their great-grandchildren and great-great-grandchildren and so on and so forth, they had things placed upon their name that they didn't deserve. And through my findings, I've actually found some justification for some of the things that they said and how they were reacting that other people found to be insanity, alcohol, possession, aliens, the supernatural, just the weird stuff. So Today I would like to talk about the mystery of the Eilean Mor Lighthouse in the Flannan Isles of Scotland, and what happened to those three men. I have been too scared to speak about it until now, but after I just bit the bullet and I just dug deep, dug deeper than I had previously, and what I found surprised me, validated half of the line of inquiry I was going down, but then what I found, it made me a little bit mad that it's taken this long for people to figure all of this out. But, God's timing is perfect timing, and what did he say? God is good, or all is good with the world. God is great. And I think what I'm about to present to you is going to prove that he knew exactly what he was talking about when he said that, because I think I've solved this unsolvable mystery, and in doing so I'm going to clear their names, and I hope that their family, their ancestral line, can look at this situation a little better now, and that the world out there can be a little bit less judgy and a little bit more responsible with how they do their research, because these were people's reputations that have been smeared all over the internet and all over YouTube and all over the papers and that for 123 years almost, and now it's time to let them speak and clear their names, solve this mystery, and let the past lay where it is so that they can cross over. And because they're stuck there, they're not going to be able to cross over until this matter is cleared, because they want to clear their names. They want people to know what's going on, which is why it kept dropping in my lap when I was doing research into, looking for future podcasts. So I'm just going to go into the details of my findings, and then you can do the rest, and I'll leave it up to you. But for those of you out there, I'll give you a quick rundown. The Eilean Mor Lighthouse on the 15th of December 1900 was the last entry by the lighthouse keepers James Ducat, Thomas Marshall, and Donald McArthur, who were the lighthouse keeper and his assistants on the island. One thing you need to remember is that the lighthouse had only been there for a year, so it was brand new. And this is important because of the fact that even though the ship that went past noticed that the light was out, and when they went to investigate, they found that the light, which was, they were using kerosene at the time, or paraffin, everything was all clean and set up and ready to go, but it hadn't been turned on. The reports in the diary didn't make sense to people, and one of the entries was to do with the mood of the other people, the other lighthouse keepers, that they were of low energy, that they were low mood. There had been like a lot of sleeping and just general all round like dark mood. And then, of course, the reports of the storm, the wind picking up, and they were praying and crying and all that sort of thing. And, people have just gone on to assume all sorts of things. What is important to note, like I said about it only being a year old, is that I think, even though there was a canary in the cage in the kitchen, the fact that they had the canary in the cage in the kitchen, which is what they used in the mines, like when the canary died, they knew that there were gases in there, toxic gases in there. I think the kerosene lamp was leaked enough toxic fumes that they were breathing in the kerosene. I will put links in the description box below to tell you about the side effects of kerosene. But also, when I looked into the geology of Flannan Isle, it is identical, almost identical in composition to the Untersberg mountain, which if you look at my podcast, if you listen to my podcast there, they had the time traveling experiences, they had, the confusion and the dizziness and, erratic behavior and loss of memory. I'll put links in the description box below of that video, but the composition of that rock is almost identical. It's basalt, it's high in magnesium and iron and quartz, so silicon dioxide in that you can take magnesium and iron and silicon dioxide, and it's in some foods, but when it is in dust form and you breathe it in, it is very toxic. The miners would get a lot of lung diseases and the coughing and having breathing issues and that, which then gives them lack of oxygen to the brain. Now this is an island that gets beaten by storms and wind and water constantly. And I think what happened is that they were, without knowing it, breathing in silicon dioxide, breathing in magnesium, breathing in the iron dust, and it was getting into their lungs, mixed with the fumes that were coming from the kerosene lamp, because they were having to clean it all out. They were having to handle the paraffin wax and that. So I think they were breathing all of these fumes in, which caused the confusion, which caused the low mood, because these are side effects of this kind of toxic poisoning. And so I think that explains that side of it as to why that they were reacting psychologically and neurologically the way that they were. Now, this is where it gets interesting. I swear to God, that's what I need to like. People on the Isle, was it the Isle of Lewis? People of the mainland, let's just say, said, like, we could see the lighthouse and there was no storm. We couldn't see a storm. And on clear days we get really good views of the lighthouse. On clear days, some of those days were clear, some of those days weren't, and I know this because I looked into the weather patterns. I think the people of the mainland got their days wrong a little bit as to when the lighthouse was visible and when it wasn't, because of the fact that on the 20th of December 1900, just 5 days after the last entry in that journal, they had a really bad storm in Blantyre in Scotland. And basically what I think happened was, when they a relief vessel called the Hesperus tried to reach the Isles on the 20th, but they couldn't due to bad weather, and they reached the Isle on the 26th. So the storm was so bad it took them 6 days to reach the Isle to investigate, the disappearance of the 3 men. The last entry into the diary was on the 15th, and then 5 days later a storm reached the mainland Scotland, reached central Scotland in Blantyre, and did a lot of damage. Like it was a pretty bad storm. So if it took 6 days for the boat to get to the Isle to investigate it because of the storm, then that would imply that it would have quite easily have taken 5 days for the storm that the men in the lighthouse were experiencing to get to the mainland. And I'll tell you why I think this is the case. I think they were telling the truth when they said that there was a storm, that there was a nasty storm. And I think with the confusion and all the toxic fumes that their body was taking in, it caused them to react the way that they did, and they ran out of the lighthouse for survival and drowned at sea, and got smashed up by the rocks and dragged down. And I say this because there's reports of damage to the west landing of the lighthouse. So of the Isle. So the north, south, and east of the Isle was completely fine, but there was quite a lot of damage to the west landing of the Isle. And if you look at Flannel Isle, on the west side of Flannel Isle, there is almost a direct path, like straight across Western Path, from the Western Isle, Western landing of Flannan Isle, to where the storm hit 5 days later. I will put a link in the, not a link, I'll put a photo in the comments community board thing to show you. Like, it's almost a direct path. 5 days later, after they reported that storm, a storm hit mainland Scotland, and nobody's put the two together. And if it took 6 days for that boat, for that ship to reach the Isle to do the investigation, then it could have easily have taken 5 days for that storm to reach mainland Scotland. And so I think that those men were absolutely telling the truth, that there was a nasty storm. And I think that because of the toxic fumes that they were breathing in from the kerosene, which, you know, well, they always say, don't buy anything you don't buy anything brand new when it first comes out. You know, when they invent new things, I know, like with video games consoles, don't buy the console, you know, the first 12 months before it comes out, because they haven't ironed out all the kinks. Well, this lighthouse was one of the first lighthouses to have these kerosene lamps, and I think that there were kinks that were to be ironed out. And I think that, you know, in handling the materials and that to get these lights, these kerosene lamps lit up for these lighthouses and that, I think they were breathing in the fumes. And the fact that the kitchen door was open, you know, it would allowed for oxygen to flow for enough air to flow, because all the doors were open, remember? Sorry, all the doors were closed apart from the kitchen one. I think that they were letting enough airflow in so that it didn't affect the bird. And then I think that in their confusion and their terrified dazed state, they decided to try and leave the island, and they got taken by the water. And people keep saying, well, you know, their bodies would have washed up, like, you know, their bodies would have turned up. But I mean, come on, there are hundreds of thousands of people that fall into the water and their bodies are never seen again. You can't assume to know that the body's going to get washed up. Just because one body does doesn't mean all of them do. That's a bit of a silly assumption to say that. There was a storm, and they could have been dragged under anything, you know, and taken out to the Atlantic Ocean. Their bodies could have been, you know, dragged out to the Atlantic Ocean or the other side of Ireland, for all we know. You have no way of knowing the way a body is going to react under certain conditions when it's underwater, especially if they had gases and stuff in their body that might have made them heavier and, you know, less buoyant. So that's what I think happened. I'm convinced of it. And the fact that nobody has seen the relevance that a storm came from the west, you know, just 5 days later, and did all that damage in Blantyre, just is shocking to me, because people would rather assume that it was insanity and aliens and ghosts and the paranormal and, you know, all that sort of stuff, rather than to look at it logically and think it's the geological formation. Untersberg Mountain, I've proven why, you know, why the things happen there that they do, and with the suicide forest, with Aokigahara forest in Japan, with the geological, you know, because it's volcanoes. They're all volcanic rock. And Ben Nevis, it's like, this is why all those years ago, why I wanted to do the study into Scottish, you know, geology, because I wanted to know why Scotland seems to be so supernaturally active. And I'm telling you now, it's any rock that is volcanic based. It seems to have an adverse reaction on the human psyche, and on the ascension process of the evolution of atomic cells, and the neurological pathways of the human brain, because it wasn't affecting the sheep on the island. In fact, apparently the island, the sheep here there have a lot of twins, and they're really good, fat, happy, healthy sheep there. So it's not affecting the sheep. So whatever's there, it was only affecting the human brain. And I'm telling you now, it's because of what the rock is made of. They're breathing in the dust mixed with the kerosene fumes, and then that storm came along, and they may have slightly overreacted, but they had stuff in their system they had no control over. It was all chemically induced hysteria. But I do believe 100% they experienced a nasty storm. So there you go. So I hope that I have done James Ducat, Thomas Marshall, and Donald McArthur and their family some justice. I will put the links in the description box below so you can see some of the photos that the damage that storm did 5 days later on the mainland in Blantyre, like in the Glasgow area. So you can see that, it ripped roofs off and like tore houses down and everything. So, you can sit and laugh and say, oh, well, they imagined the storm and blah, blah, blah. But it was enough to tear down houses and do quite a bit of damage to Scotland. So I think they had every right to be afraid, because I can imagine that the people that were in those houses when it hit 5 days later, when their roofs were being torn off and the side of their houses were coming down, I can guarantee you they would have been on their hands and knees praying to God as well. So when you see the damage, you understand what I mean. So that's why I'm mad, because these poor guys were telling the truth as best they could with all that poison in their system, and they've pretty much been made a mockery of or turned into like a clown show for people who want to assume that it was aliens or a serial killer or a mass murder or a paranormal event or whatever, when there is a perfectly logical, reasonable explanation for it. And I feel sorry for them, so I hope I've done them justice. So there you go. So enjoy the podcast, and I will speak to you later. Ka kite anō. Mwah.